Hello, and welcome to the series Bad Medicine by MsRudecat. This is the story of the crow and the hawk. On the north side of town lived a large flock of crows. They were proud birds. All of the animals respected them for their smart ways of getting food. They flew together and looked out for one another. They did not fly with the hawks. The hawks flew further and higher than the crows did. One crow, named Frank, was a troublemaker and always looking for a reason to fly away from the flock. Each day his brother would tell him that he must stay close. Flying alone was dangerous. Frank didn't think his brother was very smart and wanted to venture out on his own. Their dad and mom forbid him to ever leave without his brother. Frank knew his day would come when his brother was not paying attention to him. He planned his escape. Early one Saturday morning, Frank was having a hard time trying to crack open a nut. His brother was off in the distance and not paying attention to him. Frank was frustrated, so he knew that this may be his chance to go and fly alone. Before his brother knew it, Frank was gone. He flew south. Frank glided above the houses of town and the busy city streets. Thrilled with his freedom, he swooped in and out of electric lines. He knew the lines were dangerous, but he didn't have anyone to tell him not to do it. He flew all day by himself, did not see one crow. Before he knew it, the sun was beginning to set. Frank didn't realize how thirsty he was until he decided to stop flying. He looked for water, but he could not find any. He only knew of his family's watering hole, and he was so far from home. Panic began to set in. His stomach hurt from hunger. His tongue was so dry it felt like paper. He decided to just rest in a large tree. Frank must have fallen asleep. He was so tired. He nearly fell off the branch when he heard a loud shriek. A hawk had settled behind him and was yelling. He thought the hawk was scared, but then he realized he was laughing at him. A lone hawk is a funny thing to other hawks, but when you find a crow alone, you have to laugh. He just kept shrieking, and the noise was piercing Frank's brain. It made his whole body shiver with fear, too. Suddenly, the hawk stopped yelling and stared at Frank. He didn't say anything. He just stared at him. This made Frank very uncomfortable. He wasn't sure if the hawk was going to shove him off the branch. It was dark now, and Frank knew the ground at night was not safe for a crow. The hawk smiled, and Frank drew a sigh of relief. He didn't know the hawk's smile was a smirk. He was just glad the hawk was being suddenly friendly towards him. He relaxed his grip and fluffed his feathers. Just as he was getting comfortable again, the hawk pushed him. He caught flight just before he hit the ground and landed gracefully. Frank was an excellent flyer and felt quite proud of his performance. Looking around, he noticed that the ground was very dark and very cold. The hawk suddenly landed next to him and shattered his thoughts. Frank screamed, and the hawk laughed at him. He felt small next to this huge hawk. He knew hawks were very clever and smart. They could see better than a crow because they had a built-in magnifying eye. He thought maybe the hawk would help him find his way home. Frank told him how he had flown away from his flock so he could fly solo and be free. The hawk told him he was so brave and would help him get home in the morning. Frank wanted to go home that night, but the hawk said that he would help him enjoy his freedom for just a night. And Frank agreed because he knew he could not make it alone. Frank was so thirsty, but all he could do was think about it. Just everything was he wanted something to drink. Everything he said sounded like a croak. Hawk said he knew there was something to drink, and he was told to follow the hawk as he suddenly flew up and away. Frank couldn't see very well at night, but he managed to keep up with him. The thought of something to drink was driving him. Suddenly, Hawk swooped down, and Frank followed. There on the ground was a half-empty bottle of red water. Frank was so grateful, stuck his beak into the spilled contents on the ground. He drank long and hard. Hawk told him that the red water was called wine, made with water and berries. He said that he could drink as much as he wanted, and it would give him special powers. Frank was thrilled with that idea. He had never heard of wine. He always dreamed of being a superhero. He asked the hawk if he wanted any of the superpower wine, but Hawk said no. And Frank, well, he drank what was on the ground and the rest that was in the bottle. Several minutes after finishing it, he felt like he was on top of the world. There was nothing he couldn't do, so he thought. Hawk suddenly took flight and hopped up to the nearest tree branch. Frank was excited about his superpower feeling. His head felt light as air. He tried to fly up to the tree to be next to his new friend. His wings suddenly felt so heavy, and no matter how many times he tried to reach the branch, he failed. He turned, and he ran back, took a run for it, but only managed to run into the trunk of the tree. Hawk kept laughing and shrieking in delight. He finally managed to climb up the tree and get to the branch with Hawk. He was embarrassed to have to climb and not fly. Frank wasn't sure what to do if his superpowers did not include flying. He was a crow. He wasn't cold anymore. Hawk said that was part of the superpowers. He would feel no cold. The frost was starting to form on the branches, and he must be careful that his feet don't freeze. He tried to tuck one foot up under his wing and suddenly found himself back on the ground. It happened so fast, and he was so dizzy from the wine. He didn't know if he hurt himself. He was just so numb. Frank wasn't sure if he was numb from cold or from having superpowers. He could tell his leg was bent or maybe broke, but it didn't hurt. Hawk was up in the tree still laughing. Frank was beginning to think that this wasn't a good thing. He was still thirsty, but there was no water to drink anywhere around. He limped over to the tree and tried to climb up again. But with his injured leg, he couldn't do it. He was so cold and he was so tired, and he missed home. No one knew where he was and that he was hurt. Frank looked up for the hawk's help, but the hawk was gone. He was alone, and he was scared. He wasn't sure if he would ever see his brother again. He knew his mom and dad would be worried about him. He found some old garbage and tried to make a nest, but his feeling was starting to come back, and his leg hurt so much. He realized the hawk had tricked him with the red water called wine. He hid under the garbage until morning. The sun rose, his bright yellow ball in the sky, and Frank's head hurt like he had been hit with a branch. His leg was bent in an unnatural way, and he couldn't walk on it at all. His wings felt like they weighed several pounds each. Frank knew he had to find his way home. He tried, and he tried to take flight, but he couldn't get up in the air. Each time he landed with a thump, and he thought his head would explode. He finally passed out, hungry and thirsty again. Frank woke up, startled by a loud shriek. Hawk was back and laughing at him again. Frank was mad. Hawk offered to help him find some more red water wine and get his superpowers back. He wasn't going to trust him again. He said he would never drink anything but water. And Hawk got angry, said he wouldn't be his friend anymore then. Frank didn't want to have friends like that. Told him to leave him alone. He knew he was better off alone than a friend would put him in danger. Hawk flew off in a huff, and Frank felt a little better now and decided to fly again. He took flight on the third try and spotted a small stream in the distance. He landed wrong on his foot and fell head first into it. He thought he would drown, but righted himself and climbed out. Frank took a long, cool drink from the stream. Water had never tasted so good. He found a few berries nearby on a bush and had to eat just a little. He still didn't feel very good, but he didn't eat very many, so he was okay. Soon he was back in flight. He wasn't real sure of his direction because his head hurt and he felt like he was still spinning from the night before. He circled around and knew he was flying in circles. Nothing looked right and was fuzzy. He couldn't see clearly. Frank was getting tired of flying and thought he would never find his way home. He knew that his family was so worried by now, and he just wanted to find them. The sun was setting, and he suddenly saw a shining light in a tree. He knew that his mom had a pretty piece of metal she kept hanging from her nest. Excited, he flew in that direction. The closer he got, the more he was sure that he might find his way home. He was almost there when he saw a big black crow flying straight towards him. He was so tired, he almost didn't recognize his own brother. They almost crashed into each other. His brother led him home the rest of the way to their nest high in the tree. Frank's mom and dad were there. They had been worried sick. He could tell his mom had been crying, and his dad was angry that he had flown out alone without his brother. They tended to his wounds and bandaged his leg. He couldn't leave the nest for a while. His flying skills would never be as good as they once were. He told them the story about the wine the hawk gave him to drink, and Frank promised that he would never drink that again. He didn't need fake superpowers. He didn't need the wine from the water. Frank was very happy just to be a big, black, beautiful crow. The end. Thank you.